Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to be together, to gather, to learn, and to study, and to have conversations that, though difficult, we believe are necessary for our mission on this side of eternity. We ask that you be with us today and in our week to come. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, my friends, welcome to Politics, Money, and Religion, Oh My, Part 3, back by popular demand. So if you guys were around in December, I did a couple of series. I did a two-part series in December, and afterwards, people were like, let's do more of this. So I put together something else. So we're going to continue kind of where we left off, though I will be doing some review, because I know it's been a couple of months. And I'm really hoping that in the next 2 Sundays, I've got 2 more Sundays of this week and next week, we can start to transition from me telling you stuff and into kind of a bit of more discussion. So if you remember from the first couple of sessions, my undergraduate degree is in Christian ethics, so especially thinking about how we make decisions, about how we live and move in the world, with a Christian lens, right? And I'm especially interested in contemporary ethics, so I'm really in the kind of nitty-gritty of like, how do we decide what's right and wrong, and how do we move forward? And that, at least, is what I'm a student of. I'm not a master, it's just an undergrad degree, so I'm learning and always curious, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation continuing. So I'm just going to do a quick summary of kind of the ground that we've covered so far. Hopefully this should take about 5 minutes, or maybe 10 minutes, but if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to stop me, because I really want to make sure we're all on the same page. Raise of hands, who was here for one of the previous 2 sessions? Okay, so we've got a majority, that's good, but there's still plenty of people who probably were not here for one or the other, or missed them, so that's all good. Okay, so when we're talking about politics, there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. So the first thing is, you'll notice from my purple slides, CHC is purple. One of the things we know about Holy Comforter is that we're a mixed community politically. We have people who range on the political spectrum from many, many different points of view. And with that in mind, we need to remember that when we're hearing perspectives that may differ from the perspective that we hold, we should be practicing sensitive listening. So that means we, sometimes in an academic setting, we call it like a generous reading. So the idea is that you listen to what the person is saying, and that you're curious rather than judgmental about what they're saying, and that you understand that maybe it might disagree with you. You might disagree with it, but that disagreement doesn't mean you can't continue to have the conversation. And I'm going to reserve the right at any time to press pause on the conversation if I feel like we're getting somewhere which is not super helpful. I think we all know the current state of our politics is ugly, and I think that the church has a special opportunity as a place where people of different values come together, but who are united by something else, where we can kind of have these conversations in a healthy way, in a way that isn't happening almost anywhere else in our society right now. And so that's a real blessing, and it's also a big opportunity. One of the things that you'll hear me talk about a lot is relationship across difference. Often I talk about how important relationship across difference is when we think about our mission statement, transforming ourselves and the world through love. It's a really powerful way for us to transform ourselves, and a great way for us to transform the world. You know, for us to get out. There's sort of, I grew up in the suburbs. I grew up in kind of a bubble. Kenilworth's a bit of a bubble, right? How can we get out of the bubble and start to build connections across difference for people who are maybe outside of our day-to-day life? But I also think that that principle of relationship across difference works inside the bubble too, right? Though we may be friends with some people, if we're not talking about things that we disagree with, that might be an opportunity for a bridge. And so relationship across difference doesn't just mean how can I find people who are living away from where I'm living and hang out with them, but also how can we build a deeper, richer, and more beloved community with the people right here around us. Okay, engaging to save America. I already mentioned this, but yeah, the church is like one of the few places where we can engage safely in this kind of stuff in our current society. So let's try it. And then the last thing, I think this is a really, really important piece, which actually came out of some conversations that I was having with Will, and that is that as Christians, when we talk about current issues, the real crux of what we're trying to do is to build a more beloved community. Yeah? While it's nice that almost everyone in this room is a citizen of the United States of America, it's nice that we are becoming more informed citizens, and we're more able to make decisions and think through. The bottom line is not to serve the state, right? The point of this is not to create better citizens. The point of this is to make this community a more loving one. And I think we've got to be
more what?
A more loving one.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that we focus on that because we can get kind of bogged down, right, in like trying to come up with the best political position or figure out who's right and wrong or think about really kind of narrowly imagine ourselves inside of partisan divisions. And I think part of the Christian story is that we're kind of under and around and above some of those stuff. And so it's worth talking about, but we don't want to be trapped by it. Yeah? All right. Those of you who were here before may remember that much of my talk centered on what I call the law of love, which is the primary kind of principal core edict of Christian ethics. It's the tent pole, it's the hanger that everything else hangs on. And I argued that John 13:34-35 is the clearest formulation of the Christian law of love. Yeah? This is the centerpiece of everything that we're doing. I'm just going to read it. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So while it's a pretty short little verse, there's a lot packed in there. One really important thing I think to note is that it's not just the golden rule. Right? It's not just love each other as you want to be loved, or treat each other the way you want to be treated. It's actually treat each other the way Jesus treated people. Yeah, so it takes that sort of formulation of the golden rule and pushes it just a little bit further. And it makes us really ask questions about our tradition, about Jesus Christ, and about what his mission and ministry and what his kind of model for the world. And so we really want to be Christ-centered people when we're trying to think about Christian ethics. So it's not just treat people the way we want to be treated. It kind of pushes past that one touch. Okay. So far, this is the quick summary of our first two sessions. We talked about Old Testament prophets and a call to engagement. Yeah, I think sometimes we can stick our head in the sand and try not to think about contemporary issues in a Christian space, in a church space. And I think that's a fair response, right? I think that's a pretty good way to keep people friendly, is to not talk about it. But I worry that response is a little bit anemic, yeah? That there's something missing from it. We talked through the baptismal covenant and some of the ways that the baptismal covenant helps us to formulate the law of love. So if John 13:34 is the tent pole, I think the baptismal covenant is the tent. Yeah, that's sort of how we start to think about the law of love. One of the things that Mike really helpfully summarized for me in the second session was he talked about stepping into Christian thinking. So I'm going to summarize your own point. But the idea is that there's like a box, and you step into the box, and then that's kind of your lens. Yeah, and so you could be moving around your life, just vibing, thinking through stuff. But once you create the box and step into the box, then you're more prepared to live and move and have your being in a Christian way. And so what we're really talking about is like, what is that box? Yeah, how do we figure out what to do with that? We talked about dilemmas. Yeah, so when I say a dilemma, I mean a competing, compelling perspective. So when I say it's competing, we can think about any of the current issues that we think through. And one of the ones I talked about was tax policy. Right? We should raise taxes on some people, or we should lower taxes on some people. These are a competing principle. But they're compelling because there's reasonable Christians on both sides thinking through the issues. Yeah? And they have two different perspectives. And so part of what we did when we talked about taxes was we talked about the competing, compelling perspectives on the two sides when we think through taxes. Yeah? Raising taxes, lowering taxes. Cool. And then in the second session, we transitioned to starting to talk about the application of the law of love. We talked about the importance of compromise, both compromise with the people that you're working with or trying to make deals with, and also compromise with yourself, right? As you try to think through how much of your own principles are you willing to be flexible with, and how much are you not? And that's a really, really important question, and it's one that helps Christians find themselves in terms of different decisions. How flexible are you willing to be? And that's one of the really key ways that Christians differentiate themselves in terms of ethical decision making. Cool. And then the last is we talked through some boundaries. Yeah, so two really big boundaries we talked about, truth and tone. Yeah, so inside of the Christian ethical tradition, untruth is out of bounds. Yeah, that's like a really clear, really simple, really easy first boundary. Yeah, if we're not telling the truth, then we're not behaving ethically as Christians. And that's super core, and it's not really a negotiable. Truth really matters. And then the second is tone. Yeah, and so it doesn't matter what you're saying. If what you're saying is, if you're saying what you're saying in a way that is insulting or attacking someone or tearing someone down, especially if you think about like ad hominem attacks, name calling, that kind of stuff, it's out of bounds. It's not helpful for us either as we think through what we should be doing or as we talk about what we're doing with other people. So those are two kind of key boundaries. And there's a couple others, but we can all kind of think about what the kind of basic kind of rules of the road are. Any questions, comments, or concerns on that summary? Yeah, Larry, go ahead.
Where would you put in the 10 Commandments in this?
Yeah, that's really helpful. So the 10 Commandments is part of our biblical tradition of ethics. When we think about ethics, we think about kind of sets of rules or sets of laws. So the 10 Commandments are really absolutely crucial to our formulation of a Christian ethic. But I think that, for me at least, everything hangs on Jesus. So when we think about the 10 Commandments, we look at them through the lens of Christ. So there's laws and guidelines all through the Bible, telling us to do all kinds of different things. And I think we see all of those through the lens of Jesus. And the 10 Commandments are some of the most important ones. And they're definitely helpful, and I don't think we should ignore them. But the core for me really is Jesus. So everything that we do, everything we read, everything we think about, everything we try to behave, goes through Christ. We can sometimes, there's this really kind of interesting theological idea, which also kind of changes the way I try to live, which is that like the cross is the center point, right, of everything. It's the center point of history. It's the center point of our life. In Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, it's a total transformation of everything. So everything kind of flows through that. All time, all behavior, all love, everything flows through the cross. Is that helpful?
Sure.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So the quote that you posted from John doesn't really say love thy neighbor as thyself.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from?
Love thy neighbor as thyself is another quote from Jesus in a different part of the Bible.
I see, yes.
And he says it in John. He says it all over the place, actually. There's like kind of 3 or 4 examples. And one of the nice things about the golden rule, love thy neighbor as thyself, is that it also occurs in many other religions. Either in what they call like a positive formulation, love your neighbor as yourself, or treat your neighbor the way you want to be treated, or in a negative formulation, which is like, do not treat other people in ways that you don't give people what you don't want to receive, basically. And that kind of core ethical principle occurs in every organized religion in the world. It pops up in the Quran, it pops up in Buddhist texts, it pops up in the Old Testament as well. It's central to Jewish faith. It pops up everywhere. And one of the things that I think makes the Christian life distinct is that we see that golden rule through Jesus, which I think helps us kind of land in something specific to us.
So how is that applied in the midst of a heated political disagreement?
That's a great question. I hope that our conversation as we move forward answers that question better than me trying to explain it. I think part of the idea is that if we're really living into the Christian law of love, the way that we have political discussions changes. And some of the ways that we watch political discussions happen outside of a space like this one shows us that the people participating in it are not living through the law of love necessarily. Now, they may have a perfectly good reason for doing that, they may be frustrated, whatever, but I think it's up to us to practice something a little different.
Do you think that humans are born with a loving heart, or do you think that a loving heart is something that is learned?
Both.
That's a very good dance.
I say both.
That's a very good dance.
That's a wonderful question, Mike. I don't think we have, I want to keep moving.
Yeah.
But I think that's a question that we should all hold in our minds, because I think it hangs over everything that we do in terms of ethics and morality.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that.
Yeah,
totally.
Any other questions on this little summary? Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just reframe what we talked about as the baptismal covenant. So if you remember from the first two sessions, we went through the baptismal covenant and kind of isolated some core ethical principles that come out of the baptismal covenant. And I'm just going to list them really quickly here. And none of these should be surprising. I think they should all point to stuff that we kind of already know. But I think it might be helpful to clarify them. So, okay. 1, we strive for humility in following God. 2, we practice the mimicry of Jesus, as is part of loving each other as I have loved you. 3, we maximize the health of our community. So there's kind of a real focus on the community's well-being and on the church. We preserve the tradition of the church. We seek clarity between good and evil. That's a really, really important one. There's lots of ethical systems that don't really buy into good and evil or say it's contextual. The Christian tradition really believes that there are some things that are just wrong, and there are some things that are really right. And that can turn up the temperature on these conversations, but I also think that it's really helpful for us as we try to seek clarity. All right. We are called to expand our inclusion and grow our members. Yeah, we believe that we have something really precious, and we want it to grow. We should respect our universal duty. So our universal duty to love. Yeah, that's what agape is. If you think about agape is a specific kind of love, a kind of impersonal love for all people. An acknowledgement that all people are children of God, and that they are all deserving of love. And the last is we improve our society by alleviating suffering and raising the floor. This one I'm going to dig into just a little bit, because it's pretty important as we think through this stuff. So the contemporary way that democracies function is they try to make the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Yeah, because you want voters, right? So how can I make everything better for as many people as I possibly can? Then those people will vote for me, and then I'll take power. That's a fine thing. I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but it's not a particularly Christian idea. Yeah? If we think about the way that Jesus moved through the world, his goal was not to organize people so that he could get a bunch of people to all support him. What he did was he went to the places that were the toughest, the most broken, the most sick, the most needy, and healed and taught in those places. Yeah? So when we say raising the floor, we don't mean the greatest good for the greatest number. We're called to isolate the places that are the most in need and pick those up first. And everything else follows from that. Yeah? So the point really is raising the floor and not greatest good for greatest number. And that's something both political parties do, right? Is greatest good for greatest number. And it's not the two main dominant political parties in our current system, and it's not really something that the Christian tradition encourages us to do. That's not to say democracy is bad. I'm all for democracy. I think it's the best we got. But the Christian worldview points us towards a slightly different strategy. Any questions on this one? Whoa. Great. Okay. We're going to now do a little thought exercise. We've got 5 people. Let's give them some names. Who's this person?
Jane.
Jane? Great.
Not you, Jane.
Somebody tell me something about Jane.
I have a Jane cousin.
Say it
She's
again.
a Jane cousin.
Oh, wow.
Maybe she's our cousin.
That's awesome. She's our cousin. Yeah. Okay. I love it. Tell me something else about Jane. You could use these as prompts if you want, or just tell me something.
She likes pasta.
She likes pasta. Pasta.
Pastor.
All right, what else?
Not to be confused with a pasty.
Yeah.
Pastor.
She likes the past.
She's a pastor.
Yeah.
She likes the pastor. Jane is a pastor. She likes the pastor. All right, let's keep going. Anything else about Jane? Let's keep moving. We got 5 of these to go.
She's a mom.
She's a mom. Wonderful. Anything else?
She's a painter.
She's a painter. I love it. One more thing.
She's British.
She's British. Wonderful. How old is she?
46.
And she's 46. Awesome. How about this person? What's that person's name?
What's this person?
Robert.
This is Robert. Okay, and tell me something about Robert.
He likes sports.
He likes sports.
76.
He's a kid. How old is he?
Oh, he's a kid.
10.
He's 10.
He's a 76-year-old kid.
All right, what else? What else we got with Robert?
5 siblings.
He has 5 siblings. Big family, Robert.
Ice skates.
Uh-huh.
Professional.
He loves to ice skate. I love this.
He wears baggy hoodies.
And he wears baggy hoodies. That's awesome. All right. How about this person? What is this person's name?
Susie.
Susie.
Godfrey.
And tell me something about Susie.
Blonde.
She's blonde. Okay, anything else?
She's selfish.
Selfish. Ooh, Susie. R.I.P. and Susie.
Look at Catherine.
Susie is 26. All right, anything else about 2 more things about Susie.
She's single.
Susie's single.
Yes.
She were a little less selfish, you know.
All
right,
She
anything else?
has a fish. She has a fish.
She has a fish. Wonderful. That's 5 things. How about this person?
The Murph.
Say again?
He's the Murph.
He's the Murph. I don't want to use real people.
Oh, okay, no, real.
Because we're going to do
Yeah,
terrible
what?
We could have some fun with that.
His name's Leo.
His name's Leo. Awesome. Tell me something about Leo.
His horoscope is a lion.
He's a Leo. He's a Leo sign.
He's an immigrant.
You guess something, but don't do that yet. Hey, no, we can make him an immigrant. What kind of immigrant?
Polish.
Italian.
Sorry, he's Italian. That's great. Is he? Does he have papers? Is he a refugee? Is he undocumented? Is he a new
He's
citizen?
got papers.
He's got papers. What kind of papers does he have?
He's an au pair.
I'm sorry.
He's got student papers.
What's his immigration status? He's a
Green card.
Student.
That's a green card.
He's a student with a green card. That's great. That's awesome. Okay. What else about Leo? The Leo sign.
He's tall.
He's tall.
He plays tennis.
He's 22. He plays tennis.
Also like in the
I want one more thing about Leo.
Does not have directions.
Also,
I wanna
tennis
know.
does not look like a word at all.
But he's competitive.
Tennis, and he's competitive. Awesome. All right, last person.
Aishan.
Spell it.
Aishan.
Awesome. Aishan. Tell me something about Aishan.
Is that a go boy?
Goes that? Oh, it is a girl.
A go.
He's
Chinese
Iranian.
name.
Say again.
Iranian.
She's from Iran. Okay.
Progressive Iranian parents.
Mixed culture.
She wears a hijab.
She wears a hijab.
Why not?
Let's give her a job. She's kind.
So I guess she's Muslim. So
Why
she's
is
Muslim.
the
Dancer.
watch on? Why
She's
is
a
the
dancer?
watch on?
She watches The Bachelor.
She watches The Bachelor.
Be careful what you say.
I've got one more.
She has an adopted child.
She has an adopted child. Okay. Familiarize yourself with these 5 people. And these people, they are all beloved children of God. You guys have probably guessed what's next. We're going to talk about immigration. We got 20 minutes. Let's talk about immigration. Yeah, and we're going to talk about immigration in a way that is healthy and productive and kind. And we're going to talk about these people and their immigration stories. Yeah? Can anybody tell me any examples of immigration in the Bible?
Ruth?
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 The Egyptian, the Exodus thing.
The Exodus? Yeah? Yeah?
I have a lot here.
I've got two more that I'm thinking about. One of them is, Ruth and Esther and Abraham and the Exodus.
Noah?
Yeah. Say again?
Noah and his ark?
Noah and the ark. Yeah, he travels around. That's a good one. I didn't think about
A lot
that.
of porters there.
Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus.
Jesus into Egypt.
Yeah, when he flees into Egypt. And my last one is, I think, Peter. Peter travels around all the time, all kinds of different places. Paul, he's a citizen of the empire, so anywhere that he goes, he's kind of still a citizen. But Peter's not. So Peter roams around and ends up in Rome. He roams to Rome. Joseph, which Joseph?
The one with the dream coat?
The one with the dream coat. Yeah, he goes to Egypt. Yeah, that's another good one. So here's a couple examples. Abraham, Esther and Ruth, Jesus, Peter. I picked up one little verse from Leviticus. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So what do we see? What's the kind of core principle when we think about immigration in the Bible, especially in light of Leviticus? What do we notice? Is there anything that we know we are called to do?
Treat everybody as a guest.
To treat everybody as a guest?
There are no boundaries in the Bible.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
That people kind of move around
Uh-huh.
and they're just there. They're not having to, some people were captured and moved, but some moved on their own.
Yes. Yeah, but also, state boundaries matter quite a bit.
Yeah, it did,
As,
but it's just that it
countries
wasn't.
fighting each other and stuff.
But you were okay once you got there, and then you get a different belief. You might have to battle a little bit, but you could kind of go from. It was kind of like going from here to Canada.
Things are more fluid. Okay.
Typically, it's a struggle. I mean, you're not immigrating out of a vacation. You're being moved.
Or you're moving by necessity.
Yeah, you're fleeing.
Yeah. I think for me, one key word is welcome. Yeah, we know that we are called to welcome. Now, we as good Christian ethicists get to think through what that means and how we do it. But at its core, there's something about welcome. It's a good thing that the Egyptians were happy when Jesus and Joseph and Mary came down. Yeah.
To the point of fleeing and easy passage and all this, is there also a difference between a sojourn and a refugee immigration situation?
Define sojourn.
Well, it means journey. So it could mean a visit as opposed to a stay. And obviously not everything starts out knowing what the end is going to be, but I don't know if that is kind of different in the Bible. Like Peter, was he visiting places?
Yeah, no, he's actually moving in. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
I mean, when Jesus told the disciples to go out and spread Christianity, he said, do what they do, eat what they eat. If they don't welcome you, move on to the next town. They didn't have to go through any kind of immigration thing. They just went to the place and they said, here's what we're trying to tell you. They didn't welcome them, they moved on.
Yeah, centralized governments weren't particularly strong, so people moved around like that. Yeah. All right. So we've got 5 people here. One of these people is undocumented. One is seeking asylum. One is a refugee. One is seeking permanent residency, and one is a citizen. So we already know Leo is seeking permanent residency. We've got that one checked off. I'm making Aishan a citizen. She's an Iranian American. Who's the refugee? Jane, Robert, or Susie? Robert is a refugee. What does it mean to be a refugee? Does anybody know? It's actually like a technical term. Like, does anyone know what it actually means?
You have to seeking safety.
It means you're seeking safety.
You're typically
presumably like appointed to a place, right? You're actually going through a literal process.
Yeah, totally. So there's the UN has a international committee of kind of people that decide whether or not you qualify for refugee status. So you need to have a certain, you need to qualify with a certain number of kind of adverse experiences. So including like war, whatever. Usually it's war. And so people go to refugee camps and then they apply to become a refugee. And then once they actually get refugee status from the UN, then they can apply to be resettled in a different country. So if you encounter people who are refugees here in America, it means that they had a bunch of hoops they had to go through. First, they had to actually flee their home. Then they had to go to a refugee camp and actually get refugee status from the UN. And then they had to get their resettlement to America approved. And then once they get to America, refugees actually often are in a better situation than, relatively better situation than some other immigrant groups because they've already been given formal permission from the US government to be there. They will have work permits. They'll have like money from the government to help them get their adjustment going, whatever. Cool. Okay, so we've got a citizen. We probably know what it means to be a citizen. We've got a passport. You can vote. We've got somebody seeking permanent residency, so they're a student. Yeah, maybe Leo is married to an American. He wants permanent residency. So he doesn't have his green card yet, but he does have a student visa. He's hoping to get his green card. And we've got a refugee. All right, so the last two we have somebody who's seeking asylum and somebody who's undocumented. Who's seeking asylum and who's undocumented? Susie or Jane?
Susie is seeking asylum.
Susie is seeking asylum. What does it mean to be seeking asylum? Does anybody actually? It's a technical term as well.
No, purple.
You're also fleeing, adversity in your own country, and you then come in under seeking asylum, and then you have to go through the court process to get some sort of permanent residency where they look at adversity and struggle and grant it, but they do have documentation. They are in the court system.
Asylum seekers do have documentation?
They do.
Yeah.
So when they arrive, they have documentation, or they get here and then they seek it? They get here. My sister's an immigration attorney, so she's better than I. But yes, you come in, you say I seek asylum, and then you have documentation. If you go through the process, if you are file paperwork, and then you will be adjudicated. Your asylum status will be adjudicated at some point by the immigration courts.
Yeah, that's totally right. So basically what happens is, under the UN Refugee Convention of 1951, it is research before this talk, basically what you do is you enter a country, and it doesn't matter how you enter the country, whether you enter the country through a port of entry or you just cross into it, and then you turn yourself over to authorities. So often that's Border Patrol agents, but it can also be police officers or the military or whatever. You turn yourself over to authorities, and then you seek asylum. And so most of the asylum seekers who we see in Chicago right now, many of them are Venezuelans. They have entered the U.S. by various means, some of them through ports of entry, and some of them by crossing rivers or walking across the desert. And they submit themselves to authorities, where they are then arrested and detained, and then released, pending a court hearing. So the people that we are seeing, most of the people that we're seeing in Chicago right now, many of them are citizens of Venezuela, like I said. They will have already had an encounter with the relevant authorities, and they'll be awaiting their court date. So they're known to the government because as formally seeking asylum, but there's often a wait 3 to 6 to 12 months where people are just kind of hanging out. And there's different kind of overlapping sets of rules about whether or not those people can work. And obviously, if you're stuck for 6 months before your court date and you're not allowed to work, what are you going to do?
Who generates the asylum documents?
Who generates it?
Yeah, is it the country of origin?
No, it's not. It's so there's a system of immigration judges and
in the United States.
In the United States, yeah.
Okay.
And then there's.
They achieve their goal. Are they now refugees?
Okay. They can be granted refugee status, or sometimes they skip refugee status completely and go straight to permanent residency.
Go straight to what?
Permanent residency.
There used to be like a reason cause, right? They need to be threatened in political establishment.
Yeah, so people come and some people get their asylum claims rejected because the government believes that they have not experienced sufficiently adverse experiences in their home country. One of the things that we notice is that war is prioritized over gangs. So people who are encountering gang violence in their neighborhood often struggle with their asylum claims, whereas people who are experiencing war in their country often get granted asylum, even though sometimes the actual kind of deaths per capita in the conflict is much higher in the gang area than in the war. Like if there's a civil war that's running around in the hills somewhere in a particular country, and then people are in danger, obviously, but they may not be in danger in the same way. When we think about what's happening in Haiti right now with the gangs, I mean, it's not really a civil war, but it kind of is a civil war. So anyway, that's all kind of part of the way that we do this calculus, where you're an immigration judge. You have to say, okay, well, this person has experienced this or this. Cool. So that means that Jane, our British pasta painter pastor, is undocumented. So what does it mean when you're undocumented? Who can tell me what that means? She is a person who is undocumented.
It means your legal status. You do not have legal status. So perhaps you came in on a guest visa or a student visa that lapsed. Mm-hmm. So you now do not have a legal status to be in the country.
Mm-hmm. You're on the slide.
Yeah, just maybe at some point you were, and then that you fell out of status, or maybe you entered, you know, again as a visitor, like on a plane, and then you just never left. Mm-hmm. So it just means that, yeah, you don't have legal status.
Yeah, exactly. So either your visa's expired, or you did not enter into a report of entry, and you've not submitted yourself to the relevant authorities. So actually, we have all 5 of these groups, and people in other gray zones in America right now. And so when we talk about immigration, I often think that one of the mistakes that we make is we think about it all as one thing. And it's not one thing, right? It's at least 5, if not 10 or 15 different things that are all happening at the same time. And so government policy affects each one of these people. So, for example, we have refugee quotas. So there's a certain number of refugees that are permitted into the country on any given time. Usually it's around 100,000 a year. There's undocumented people who come and either overstay or don't submit, and these people come from all over the world, and they're the hardest to track, obviously, because they're undocumented. We've got asylum seekers, so this is kind of the hottest topic right now. We have a ton of asylum seekers, more than we were kind of expecting or prepared for, and that's why we are starting to see some of the stuff we're seeing in Chicago right now.
What's the volume there compared to 100,000 refugees?
It's much higher. I'd have to look it up for you. I'm not sure. But it's tens of thousands a month, as opposed to. And I think it's like 85 or 90,000 refugees. And then each president, each year, decides how much it's going to be. So in the last year of Obama's presidency, especially after in the last quarter, Q4 of 2016, Obama actually doubled the refugee quota because he knew that Trump was going to cut it significantly. And so the last 3 months of 2016 were the highest months in history in terms of refugee arrivals, for example. I know that because I had an internship at a refugee resettlement agency in 2017, and they were all like, it was crazy. There were just so many people, but cool. Then, yeah, there's this whole process in terms of seeking permanent residency, so I know a little bit about that, and it's very expensive, and it takes a lot of time. And then citizenship, which happens either by birth, if you're born in the country, or people who've gone through one of these processes all the way through. So people have probably heard of the DREAM Act, the Dreamers. So these are undocumented children who've been living in America for a long time. And they're kind of in a gray area now between undocumented and permanent residency.
Dreamers could have been born here, correct?
No. Citizens.
They're citizens if they're born
here.
here.
They're citizens if they're born here. Okay, so they're children that came here. Got it.
Yeah, children who came either as asylum seekers or as undocumented.
Yeah. Okay.
But if they're granted asylum, then they're no longer dreamers, right? Because then they have asylum status. So they're all children of undocumented immigrants. Okay. We've got 3 minutes before I'm supposed to finish up, so we haven't really gotten to the discussion part. But that's good, because I've got a whole other week next week. So you gotta come back. If you want to know what happens in these 5 stories, come back next week. I guess let's just start with one thing, because we've got a little bit of time. Let's talk about the social conditions. One of the things that we have noted is that Jesus says that we should be aware of the signs of the times, thinking about when the kingdom of God is coming. And many theologians also think about that as part of a Christian call to be aware of what's going on around us. Yeah, what's happening in society. What are the social conditions? What's happening? I just want to lay some groundwork, which we can build on next week, about the signs of the times. So what do we notice is happening right now about immigration? I want facts. I don't need value judgments. What do we see? Maybe tell me something that they see around the issue of immigration right now.
A whole lot of people standing on the corners in the grocery store with their hands out for money and food.
Lots of people asking for help on the street. Awesome.
In our community.
Anger and animosity.
Anger and animosity. Anger and animosity.
In discussion.
From who and towards who?
Everybody.
Everybody. Okay.
About the subject.
Awesome. What else do we notice?
It's kind of tribal, so there's extreme points of view on both sides.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of confusion. I was just reading something from my neighbors today about if there's fraud involved. Are these people legitimately needing help? And I feel like that creates a lot of the anger and all the other, like just not knowing what's real.
Confusion about honesty.
Yeah.
I say fear.
There's fear. From whom and to whom?
Just fear of other. Because they're going to be bringing violence.
And they're fearful too because of some of the folks I was talking to, their journeys that, took them a year to get here, the violence that ensued, the hardships that they had, the multiple encounters with law enforcement, and then they finally they get put on a bus in from Texas to Chicago, and they're kind of like, what? Right? So.
Sympathy.
You notice sympathy. From whom and to whom? Sympathy from whom and to whom?
From the general public to individuals and families.
And I'd lump compassion in there.
Sympathy and compassion from general public to families. Okay?
I think there's also, somebody might have said this, but there's a lot of hatred and anger from a whole other group of our society.
Hatred and anger.
Resentment.
Yeah, from whom and to whom?
Well, interesting dynamic on the resentment part, because as I deal with the homeless down in the city, you have the folks that have been homeless for a number of years, and you have all the immigrants that are coming up that are getting housing, and I can tell you they're pretty pissed off that they're not being prioritized for the housing queue. So I can tell you that's one group of people that's has resentment.
I feel like that's where the honesty comes in, because you just don't know all the details of anybody's.
Sure.
And I'd say there's a desire to help.
I'd add helplessness. I think on both ends. I don't know how to adequately help other than the very simple things I can do. I know they feel helpless.
There is the language barrier too, which I find is very difficult for me. It's not like Brits coming over where it's hard to understand always, but you listen carefully.
We get misunderstood too, as you try to.
Please, your English is surprisingly good.
Okay. Fear of disease and danger.
Fear about disease or danger? When you say danger, what do you mean specifically? This is just something you notice. It doesn't mean something you agree with, but you're afraid about disease.
Violence of cartel and
especially gang violence.
Yeah. Suspicion.
gangs.
Okay. We notice suspicion. Okay.
Trauma.
Trauma. From whom? To.
Immigrants often have a lot of trauma.
Can't imagine.
Notice a lot of welcome as people house refugees and ask for supplies from the community.
I think another thing too that's overwhelming right now is people from many countries around the world are trying to make their way to North America. It's not just Venezuelans, but it's people from India, China, Russia. So it's just, it's never ceasing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I think it's so overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me. I think, yeah, one of the reasons that we think about Venezuela a lot is because they're some of the most vulnerable, they're the most vulnerable group right now, is citizens of Venezuela. And that's for a couple of reasons. It's because of the diplomatic relationship between the U.S. and Venezuela is quite poor, and also because there's not a strong, significant Venezuelan population already living in America. So a bunch of other countries, like for example, we had a ton of Ukrainian immigration in the last couple of years. We didn't see almost any Ukrainian people experiencing homelessness because there's a really strong Ukrainian community already, and people just like moved in with each other, you know. And so Venezuela is kind of top of mind right now, and that's because they're the most vulnerable, but actually not because they're necessarily that much larger or more impactful than anybody else. They just, yeah.
Different journey too, right? One you get on an airplane,
yeah,
and one you hoofed for a long time.
Yeah, and I think the same is true with other like Guatemalan, Nicaraguan, this kind of stuff. Like there's a slightly stronger community already living in the United States from these places, just because there's been waves of immigrants beforehand. So yeah, the people who are citizens of Venezuela are particularly vulnerable right now. Yeah. Well, last thing, Kevin.
Sorry, because Ukrainians have a lot more rights because they come as refugees.
Yeah, they were granted refugee status quickly. Yeah, that's right.
Because of the war.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. So actually, there was a big bill that passed that granted Ukrainians like automatic refugee status in the U.S. or something equivalent to automatic refugee status. It's not exactly refugee status, but and that was very helpful because they could then work and stuff easily. I have got to go get dressed.
Catherine.
Come back next week where we take all of this stuff. I think one of the things I'm noticing here, I really appreciate everybody's vulnerability and willing to share. I think one of the things I'm noticing is there's a lot of pain and frustration and fear and sadness in here. And I hope this conversation was helpful. I think next week it might be even more helpful because we can take some of this stuff that we're seeing and feeling and try to reconstitute it, recreate it, think through it, and start talking about what's next. Yeah, so please come back as we hear more of the magical, wonderful story of Jade, Robert, Susie, Leo, and myself. Thanks very much, everybody.